Well, this is Dr. Stan here at Radio Liberty, coming to you from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay, and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story, hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for the survival of Christian civilization, it's going to be reality and not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I have to remind you the views expressed here are not necessarily those of the owner's management, staff, sponsors, or supporters of the station you're listening to. They happen to be my views, and, well, for the next hour, the views of our good friend Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who's taught at the university level, who's been a consultant to industry, who certainly writes successfully. He was in the Reagan Department of Education, but he's here with us today to bring us up to date on what's really going on in the world, and then to discuss his latest book, The Power Elite, their history and their future. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Okay, well, as usual, before getting into my latest book, The Power Elite, Their History and Future, that's offered by Radio Liberty, I give some comments about contemporary notes of interest. And there are several that what you don't see much of in the American press, but if you know where to look, you can find information. First of all, in the London Review of Books, less than a month ago, Seymour Hersh, who is somewhat suspect on a number of occasions, but when he does dig up some facts, they are rather interesting. He had an item in the London Review of Books called Who's Sarin, S-A-R-I-N, the sarin gas. And basically what he has done is put forth what a lot of us have said, and that is that it wasn't the Assad forces that used the chemical weapon, sarin gas, but rather the al-Nusra group, the one that's affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Over there, they had the capability of manufacturing large quantities of it, and so on. And so Seymour Hersh goes into his intelligence officers, past and present, who he knows. And he's in this particular case, it says, a former senior intelligence official told me that the Obama administration had altered the available information in terms of its timing and sequence to enable the president and his advisors to make intelligence retrieve days after the attack look as if it had been picked up and analyzed in real time as an attack happening. The distortion, the intelligence officer said, reminded him of the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, when the Johnson administration reversed the sequence of National Security Agency intercepts to justify one of the early bombings in North Vietnam, and so forth and so on. So you might check that out. It's on the internet, the London Review of Books. It's titled Who's, W-H-O-S-E, Sarin, S-A-R-I-N. So here you have a case of the president making these overtures and blusters towards Syria, and based on information which was to be charitable, faulty at best, and actually had distorted it to do what he wanted to do. But that's the way Seymour Hersh and everybody might look at this. But and I won't go into this again because I already have, how the whole thing is part of a sort of plan which is unfolding, and that's why they allowed the sarin gas, other things, to leave Iraq in the first place years ago, to go to Syria so that the plan would be this could happen today. You couldn't have this happening today unless Saddam had sent his sarin gas to Syria. I think that's one reason why George W. Bush did not say, well, yeah, we know where the weapons of mass destruction went. They went to Syria. He kept his mouth shut because the plan is now it is useful.
And I think it's so vitally important that what Dr. Cuddy is saying. Basically, Assad's series of poison gas, most of this came certainly from Iraq's poison gas. And of course, Iraq's poison gas was given to Saddam Hussein by the United States. So basically, a lot of this is American poison gas. You went to Iraq, went certainly then down into Syria. But we're not going to tell the American people that, oh my goodness, terrible Assad, we're going to have to attack Assad. And we'll be back in just a moment here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan here. Our guest this afternoon, Dr. Dennis Cuddy, who's taught at the university level, who certainly has been a consultant for industry, has certainly worked in the Reagan Department of Education. He's a prolific writer, and certainly a regular guest on Radio Liberty. And he was simply talking about this whole phony issue that Seymour Hersh had written an article in the London Review of Books, pointing out that this whole issue of Assad using poison gas was intentionally a lie on the part of the Obama administration. They altered the intelligence of reports so that they could justify an attack on Assad. They wanted an effort. They wanted to be able to justify attacking him, just as they wanted to take us into a war back in 1964 after the Gulf Tonkin incident, a totally fallacious incident. 58,000 American boys died. And it was all a lie. There was no Gulf of Tonkin incident. It was all contrived, and certainly even Robert McNamara eventually admitted that. But go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Okay, so anyway, that's one incident. The next thing, of course, is the unfolding knowledge of what the NSA, National Security Agency, is able to do. And just about 5 days ago, there was an item titled "How the NSA Hacks Your iPhone," and the program they use is called Dropout Jeep. Now, remember, I said that all of this PRISM stuff that there was in the news that the NSA was using actually is 20-plus years behind the times, because they had something that did about the same thing called PROMIS, P-R-O-M-I-S, no E on the end of it, many years ago, that I wrote about many years ago. And so, in this particular one, the unfolding of what happens is presented as there was what they call is a 50-page catalog of what they call backdoor penetration techniques that the NSA uses, and you can find this in the German publication Spiegel. It's translatable. They have an English edition. And so what you find is that there's a description of how the NSA actually bugs remotely your iPhone. They don't have to get a court order to tap your landline. They just bug your iPhone. And the way they accomplish that is this software that's called Dropout Jeep, J-E-E-P, like the vehicle Jeep. And in this, it's described as follows, quote, "Dropout Jeep is a software implant for the Apple iPhone that utilizes modular mission applications provided..."
Hold that thought, Dennis. We'll be back in a moment. Well, this is Dr. Cuddy, Dr. Stan, and Dr. Cuddy is just talking about the fact that certainly they have the ability to listen to all of your conversations on your iPhone. They've had this ability for 20 years or more, has nothing to do with terrorism. They know this whole war on terrorism is as phony as a $3 bill. How many terrorist attacks have we had in the United States in the last 12 years, since September 11th? You can count them on the fingers of one hand, and most of them are contrived. Basically, because the war on terrorism is simply to justify setting up a surveillance society where they watch everything and watch everybody, collect dossiers, and, of course, prepare their list of who they will move against, of course, as we move into the dictatorship, because, of course, our government is controlled by far different forces than the average individual understands. But certainly Dr. Cuddy is talking about these programs that they have that now allow them to even to certainly listen to on the iPhones on a regular basis, and certainly to our computers. All of this is being monitored, and that's why they're so furious with Snowden, because he's brought this out and letting the American people know about it, but it existed long before the phony war on terrorism. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Yeah, and it does a number of things. Actually, you can with this Dropout Jeep program here, there's various applications. It uses a lot of this, technical terminology, but what it amounts to is they can retrieve information of your list of individual contacts that you have. They can monitor your voicemail. They can perform geolocation. They can locate you. Camera capture. They can see you. Cell tower location, and so forth and so on. And so there's command and control and data exfiltration. They call it not infiltrate, exfiltration can occur with this data connection that they have. And they actually provide this flow chart in this piece that you can look. You can just Google this, quote mark, how the NSA hacks your iPhone, close quote, in Google, and this description should show up. So they've been able to do that and have been doing it for quite some time. And also, when you look at what President Obama is doing, I want to clarify something that I often say. I often say President Obama and other presidents are puppets. Well, they are in a sense. There's nobody like telling him every minute of the day what he should do next. And the reason is because you have to understand this sort of flows from Cecil Rhodes, among others, but Cecil Rhodes is conspiracy. He said it was a scheme to take the government of the whole world. He had his secret society of the elect. And what Rhodes said, and he formally began it in 1891, he said that his conspiracy would last about 6 decades, roughly 60 years, to about 1951. And he said, and then his conspiracy would end as a conspiracy. And he didn't mean that his project would end, but what it would do is be changed or evolve into a network of like-minded globalists. They would not actually have to perform conspiratorial functions as in a secret meeting in a secret place with secret orders to certain individuals to do X, Y, and Z. They would simply have enough people in place that they wouldn't have to do that. It would just be, sort of organically go forward, and people who they chose for specific occupations as university presidents or whatever would just automatically do what the original conspirators want them to do, which is a globalist worldview promoting a world government. And so what you have with President Obama is typical of that. They don't really have to call him up and tell him at 10 a.m. today and then 11 a.m. and 12 noon and 1 o'clock, everything to do. They watch them from years ago when they're just a young fellow and a young woman if it's a woman. And they monitor them and, see how they're doing, and they usually have a handler position with them. Could be a wife that they get, hooked up with them sort of accidentally on purpose. Or, an advisor, sort of like Brzezinski was an advisor to Jimmy Carter, and then he's an advisor on foreign affairs to President Obama. And so they have these handlers with them to just, watch them, be sure they're okay. But originally they're put through various tests at their lower level, wherever they're in a city council or, the governor of a state, and then a U.S. senator, and then eventually a president, whatever it is. They've been watched, they've been monitored, they've been tracked, they've been tested, see how they react to certain situations, see if they go along with something or object to it, and why. And that way they identify people as they move up the hierarchy of success and of power, meaning doing the bidding of this power elite. So in a way they're puppets, but it's not in the usual sense. By the time they've screened you from the time you were in college to the time you're 50 years old, they've got 30-some years of detailed background and analysis of what you, the person they want to be one of their main movers and shakers, is capable of doing, will do under certain circumstances. They have a psychological profile on the people. They know what their tastes are, what they like, what they don't like, and so on, so that by the time they become, say, 50 and they're running for the U.S. Senate, they don't really have to, tell them what to do every second. They know that person is going to pretty much do what they want them to do without them even telling them to do that. That's the refined psychological techniques that go on. And I remember, I've mentioned this before, so I won't belabor this either, that I think they were looking at me for the same sort of thing, and Carnegie, for example, is heavy into this stuff. And, of course, Carnegie Foundation is in New York, and Barack Obama deliberately transfers from Occidental College to Columbia, and he's there, and he spends a lot of time with Zbigniew Brzezinski when he was a young fellow, when President Obama was a young fellow. And Brzezinski had just come out of the Carter administration. in the late 70s as the National Security Advisor, placed there by David Rockefeller, of course, and pretty much directing national security policy for President Carter. And so when you have a person like that monitoring you and, watching you, testing you, and you have this young college student and they send them to, wherever, Pakistan or abroad or traveling, and put him through various tests and see that he gets elected and helped to do whatever, they pretty much know what you're going to do. And so Carnegie, as well as the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, all are involved in this. And you'll remember that Norman Dodd, back when he was doing work for the Reese Committee, examining taxes and foundations, had his secretary, a woman, look at some of the minutes of the meetings of Carnegie when it first began around 1910, and she saw in their minutes of their meeting that they discussed the issue of how to accomplish their goals, and they said war would be a good way to do that. War would be a good way to accomplish their goals for various reasons. And so Carnegie is very much into all of this. You have the Carnegie Institution funding the Cold Spring Harbor eugenics experiment early in the last century, around 1904. And I put this information in my books like Secret Records Reveal. And so Carnegie was very, very important. In 1963, Carnegie put up the money for the first governor's school, as it's called, in the nation. This is a school where you have your gifted and talented high school students attend. And the first one was in my state, and I was there in the first class. And since then, it's gone everywhere. It's in, Bill Clinton and Hillary modeled theirs in Arkansas after hours, and all 50 states now have these things. But anyway, Carnegie funded that, and the test that they used seemed rather strange to me. I've mentioned this before, so I'm not going to go back into it to any great extent. But the test, a lot of them came from the Psychological Corporation, which was formed around 1920-21. And what their mission was is they wanted to identify people in general, who might be useful as public policy people if placed in particular positions, whether in government or academia, whatever, but primarily in government, so somewhere they could make a difference. And the correspondence between the Psychological Corporation and the person who tested us, gave us all these tests, said they wanted to keep a file on us. They wanted to keep a file on us. So they were going to collect data, and they gave us all of these tests, and a lot of them were values probing. And I've mentioned this, and I've got a column, newswithviews.com, in which I go into this sort of information. And they would ask, they would give us like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which has about 771 questions about do you believe in God, and so on. Now, once a person answers all that, 771 questions, you can find out a lot about a person, their temperament, their likes, dislikes, what particular pet peeves they have, and so on. So that's really a way of getting a psychological profile on an individual. You give them this battery of tests, and you put them all together, and you pretty well know what this individual, this youngster, usually high school, college, is capable of doing, or wants to do, or doesn't want to do. And on that basis, you can pretty well choose who you want to suggest might run for public office, and move them on up the ladder and favorably publicize them, and so on. And so that's what the clarification on President Obama. Yes, he is a puppet, as the others have been, most of the others, but it's really not necessary to have somebody actually sitting in some off of the West Wing in the White House, waiting to tell President Obama his next move at 11:30 a.m. or something. Well,
of course, I'm sure you're well aware. Susan Rice is there. Susan Rice, Rhodes Scholar, Sydney is a member of the Trilateral Commission, a former ambassador to the United Nations, appointed in 2008. Now she's, I don't know what her official position, but she's with Obama every single day. This woman from the Trilateral Commission, part and parcel of this whole movement created by Cecil Rhodes. So basically, I'm sure she keeps a pretty close eye on what Obama does. And I really think that if Barack Obama tried to do what he thought was right, they'd send him on a trip to Dallas. They do not allow certainly people in key positions in government to think and act independently. President Kennedy tried, and, well, we know what happened to him. We'll be back in a moment. Dr. Cuddy, you go right ahead.
Right, and this isn't new. I mean, it goes back to Woodrow Wilson and Colonel House, and if you look at the personal letters of Colonel House, you can find it's almost like a diary that he's going through, and he's sending something back to Paul Warburg, saying that he's watching Wilton, and don't worry, I'll be sure that he moves forward with the Federal Reserve Act and 1913 and so on. So he's reporting back, and everything's okay. And so these people are around him and watching them and monitoring them and making various suggestions. And but the point is, once they put this scheme into place, it really was, as Cecil Rhodes said, not really necessary to have an actual conspiracy with constant monitoring, because they have a profile. They know what Barack Obama will or won't do in certain circumstances, and so that's why they facilitate his rise to power. And plus, they might have a little something on him somewhere, something he wish he hadn't done. And so what you have largely is a manipulation of our leaders, call them puppets if you want. You have the media telling you certain things and not telling you certain things. And then, of course, you have to lower the standards for everything. You lower educational standards. You lower the standards in art and music. Now you can just bang on a drum, and that's called music, because the beat is all that matters, and the beat is an emotional response, which is, as I said, the power elite moved us about 50 or so years ago through the culture, through music and art and everything, from the cognitive domain, that's your thinking domain, your reading, writing, math, basics in school, to the affective domain, that's social relationships and feelings. Why? Because those are more easily conditioned or emotions manipulated. And so that's what they do to guide people in a particular direction, really almost unknown by the individual themselves. They think they're smart and doing what they're independently arriving at is the best decision for a particular act, but it's often already a foregone conclusion, and so that's why I call them sometimes puppets. And then the press, of course, has a role now of not just being reporting the news, but sort of editorializing, even within news articles, which are supposed to be objective, and then, as I said, just withholding information. So, for example, only recently did we learn that with this great effort to have equality in the military, including combat troops, about half of the general inductees who are female into the Marines could only do about 3 pull-ups, as they call them. 8 would be a perfect score, but about half of them could only do 3 pull-ups, and they were just going to sort of change that, as a requirement. We'll just drop it because, they would not make it, right? And so what's more important to them is this egalitarian ethic, regardless of whether the soldier can perform the functions necessary to do a good job. And so you have this conditioning of the public along those lines, and the public is kept very busy. I've been through that before, going here and going there.
Hold that thought, Dennis. We'll be back in a moment here. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest, of course, is Dr. Dennis Cuddy. Dennis, go right ahead. Dennis is talking about how they're altering the very structure of our society, how they're lowering the standards in the military. Certainly the women who are Marines certainly cannot compete physically with the males. They're not able to do certainly pull-ups. Ordinarily, you should be able to do a number of pull-ups. They can't, most of them can't do, at least half of them can't even do 3 pull-ups. So what we do is we simply lower the standards. After all, we have to have an egalitarian military, and so we'll lower the physical standards and requirements for our military, because we wouldn't want to have certainly men a lot stronger than women, would we? We live in a world gone mad, ladies and gentlemen, and we're setting ourselves up for a terrible defeat in the coming war. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Okay, and as I said, this all applies to all kinds of fields. The press withholds information. They put a particular slant. They don't challenge President Obama with his charge that it was Assad who used the chemical weapons and so forth and so on. And as I said, education is very, very important because that's where values are formed right from the earliest of ages. And that's why they wanted to lower from the first grade down to compulsory kindergarten and then move kindergarten down to 4 years of age and then move it down even further. And even a so-called conservative like Lamar Alexander, when he was U.S. Secretary of Education, said he wanted the youngsters in school beginning at 6:30 and down to almost just out of the cradle. So it's a plan that is well formulated for total control, and it goes back a long, long way. And that's where we'll pick up with my book, The Power Elite, Their History and Future. And we're in this particular chapter that's about the Illuminati. And the reason education is important is I had been talking about the Illuminati's influence in America and how George Washington had written a letter to a Reverend Snyder in 1798 assuring him that he did know, that Washington did know that the Illuminati was here. And I read some of the oath taken by this theistical society, which is virtually identical to the Bavarian Illuminati degree of the Minerval. They have various degrees, and this was the Minerval, M-I-N-E-R.
I don't think it's important for our listeners to understand there really are secret societies today. There have always been secret societies. I know when I lived in South Africa, the government there was controlled by a secret society. The Buddhabond, you've never heard of it, but everybody there understood what was going on. Here in America, of course, you're not allowed to know about the secret societies that control the media, that control the banking system, that control the military, suddenly control our educational system, suddenly and control the government. You're not supposed to understand that they're really just small numbers of people who make mockery out of our electoral process, use electronic voting machines, all of which can and are rigged today, so that we go to the polls every 40 years to vote, and then they determine who is going to be elected by how they rig the voting machines. Why do we have to have electric voting machines? Oh, why? Because we have all those hanging chads on the... If we have regular voting, we need honest voting like electronic voting machines that can all be rigged, and nobody talks about it. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy.
Yeah, and there's various ways of rigging these machines. You have the machine where you pull the lever and you go in there the curtain, but they can just, with the flip of a switch, they can adjust that number, the total of how many voted for this candidate or that candidate by way of a computer. Another thing they can do is not only do that, but they can find out how you voted. It's supposed to be a secret ballot, originally called the Australian ballot because they had the first secret type of ballot that we know today. But if you look at some of these machines, what you do is you don't go behind a curtain in a booth. You go to this little area, and you have this little, cubby hole sort of thing with a little table, and you mark your ballot. Then you slide it into a counting machine, a sort of computer. And what they can do there is they know what number voter you are because they have cameras, supposedly to monitor whether everything's on the up and up. But that camera can see that you might be voter number 932, and then it's a simple for that machine. And so it's a simple matter as the cards are dropped into this pile at the bottom of the machine of later, after you've gone, retrieving card number 932. And so they can actually find out how you voted, in addition to just punching another button and changing the results. And so, as I said, education is very, very important to this. If you want to, change the society, have the whole society change, which is what the Illuminati wanted to do. One of the primary areas that you have to control is the schools. And according to Will Monroe's book, History of the Pestilentian Movement in the United States, that's 1907, the educational ideas of the Illuminati member Johann Pestilenti, he had the code name Alfred, that was his code name, began to be printed in journals and textbooks in the U.S. as early as 1806.
Hold that thought, Dennis. We'll be right back. Go right ahead, Dr. Cuddy. We're talking about Mr. Pestalozzi.
Pestalozzi, the end is L-O-Z-Z-I, and it's Swiss. Switzerland borders Italy, and it's an Italian name, but it's Pestalozzi. It's pronounced like a T, L-O-T-Z-I, Pestalozzi, but it's actually two Z's. That's just the way the Italians pronounce that type of syllable. And his code name, all these Illuminati members all had code names, and his was Alfred. And his works began to be printed in the journals and textbooks in the U.S. as early as 1806, and began to be used in some of the school systems, especially in New England, because they were viewed favorably by the intelligentsia of Horace Mann's day. If you don't know who Horace Mann is, he was known as the father of American public education. John Dewey, who will come along later, is known as the father of progressive education. But Horace Mann was generally known as the father of American public education. This is in the first half of the 1800s. And in Lawrence Kremen's book, C-R-E-M-I-N, his book titled Transformation of the School, that was published back in 1961, Kremen said, quote, "For man, the essence of the moral act was free self-choice," end quote. And that's very similar to what Adam Weishaupt said, do your own thing, do what thou wilt, and so on. And according to a person who has a fairly good website, Terry Melanson, he has the Illuminati Conspiracy Archive, the utopian socialist Robert Owen, who I've mentioned before, he visited the Illuminist of Pestalozzi at Yverden, Y-V-E-R-D-O, in Switzerland in 1818. And what he did was, when he came here, Robert Owen and his son Robert Dale Owen and Fanny Wright set up that first commune in the late 1820s in New Harmony, Indiana. And so when he first came here, he had been originally from Scotland, and Owen had used the word socialist, that word socialist, in print in 1827 for the first time. That's the first time people can see that term appear.
Hold that thought, Dennis. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and you must understand that the people who want a world government have always realized they had to use, certainly, the educational system to get people to be willing to go along with altering our concept of government and be willing to look to government to solve our problems. And basically, of course, most people believe America is a democracy. It's not. You can read the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, sort of the constitutions of every one of our states. Never once does it mention the word democracy. If you read the Federalist Papers, it decries democracy. In fact, James Madison wrote that democracies are air spectacles of turbulence and contention, are air incompatible with personal liberty and private property, and are usually as short in their lives as they are violent in their deaths, because our founding fathers remembered what Plato had said, and that is, certainly democracies always descend into despotism. And yet, of course, 99 out of 100 Americans believe we're a democracy. We're not. Certainly nowhere in our founding documents is there any mention of democracy other than decry it. But you see, by controlling the educational system, you can get people to believe a lie. What is this lie about? Well, it's because dependence upon government. Government can provide for certainly our health care. Government can provide for our retirement. Government can certainly provide for our housing and our welfare. And of course, it's a wonderful, wonderful utopian society we live in. The only trouble is we can't afford it. We're going behind $1 trillion a year. But don't you worry, we're simply borrowing the money. We'll continue borrowing the money until the whole thing collapses. And then, of course, they can establish their dictatorship. People will be desperate. They'll look to government to solve the problem that this secret societies have created. And basically, the average American doesn't even understand. There have always been secret societies here. And they're key to their control has been education. This is why when people graduate from college, it's not that they're idealistic, they're programmed. It many times takes 20, 30 years before people can undo the programming that they got in their education. And some people never begin to understand that freedom is limiting the power of government. Liberty and limited government is synonymous. Tyranny and total government is synonymous. And today we have total government control. And democracy is degenerating into despotism, just as Plato wrote over 2,500 years ago. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the founders are usually called democracy mobocracy because that's what it degenerated into. Was the rule by the mob, the tyranny of the majority. You know, we think, oh, look, majority rule. Well, the founders pretty well knew what would happen, and they called it the tyranny of the majority. You know, absolute power corrupts, the power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that includes masses of individuals, not just unique, solitary individuals themselves. So that's where the tyranny of the majority comes in, and that's, in a way, what the South felt the North was doing in the time of the Civil War. That's why they had secession and the Civil War occurred. But, what happens is you would have somebody like Robert Owen, and he's from Scotland, and they had this sort of beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and so he was writing about this, Owen was, and he used the word socialist for the first time in print in 1827, and right after that they formed the first commune in 1828 in New Harmony, Indiana. So he'd come over from Scotland and setting up this sort of utopian socialist republic. But what it was doing was replacing the old individualist and individual responsibility with a certain religious component to it, which would take care of people. So initially, what you would have is as the towns opened up or the people moved west, one of the first buildings they would build is a church. And if somebody got sick through the church, there would be help provided for that individual. People may take turns making them food or harvesting the crops for them or whatever. But with Owen and the Industrial Revolution occurring, what they wanted to do was switch that to government instead of the church, the church body, the body of Christ, for example, helping people. No, they wanted to switch it to the government. And this was all part of his plan because Robert Owen, as I said last time, had joined with Fanny Wright, the sort of first women's lib person who had come over from France, the time of the French Revolution. And a little after that, the Marquis de Lafayette brought her over here to, stir stuff up. And she did. And then they got together with Orestes Brownson in 1829 to form the Working Men's Party. So you had a whole transference from the church and what had been formerly the responsibility of religious people in the church to, am I my brother's keeper and so forth. And they wanted to deliberately switch that attitude towards, well, the government will do it. We'll pay taxes to the government. Then if there's a problem, the needy, require some help or something, well, the government, not the church, it'll be the government. Now, churches could still do something, but the point is if you start taxing people and taxing people and taxing people, what will happen is the government would take over more and more and more of that responsibility, which is what has happened.
And, of course, basically the thing is that it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It never worked in any other country. Look what's happening, ladies and gentlemen. We have this wonderful utopian society, and we're going behind $1 trillion a year. Well, really much more than that because, of course, they're not using the general accepted accounting techniques. They're not telling you that we're not using GAAP techniques, general accounting, accepted accounting principles. We're certainly money in, money out. We're really going behind about $4 trillion every year. $1 trillion, but then we have all these people who certainly now who are entitled to retirement. There's no money. The money for the retirement is not going to be there very soon. Or we're only going to have maybe 1 or 2 people working for every person retired. Then we're going to have to provide their health care. We're going to have to provide their Medicare, their retirement, their Social Security, and the whole thing collapses. They know exactly what they're doing. They want to create chaos because they want to create a dictatorship. They know what they're doing, but they do not want the average individual to know that this is a little small elite that runs our government behind the scenes, controls both political parties. They know exactly what they're doing, and if you don't believe they exist, read David Rockefeller's memoirs. He will tell you about that secret cabal. But if that's true, why doesn't everybody know what's in David Rockefeller's book? Why, of course, Glenn Beck tried to tell the public, and immediately he was fired by Fox. This is how the system really works. And anybody, certainly within the media today, who tells the truth will lose their job, or perhaps they'll lose their life as well. Go right ahead. So what they were doing was transferring from the church various functions, such as helping the poor and so forth, to the government and the welfare state as we came to know it about 50 years or so ago under Lyndon Johnson. And this was all rather deliberate. Robert Owen had organized the first socialist movement in England in about the mid-1830s, and eventually he was venerated as his quote was, the patriarch of English communism. And Karl Marx had been in England, and was the individual who, many years later, I say as a Johnny-come-lately, authored the first the Communist Manifesto in 1848. But what you see when you look back is that Robert Owen, when he came over here, they formed that first commune in 1828 in New Harmony, Indiana. This was way before Marx, and actually Owen had influenced an individual like Etienne Cabet, who lived the late 1700s up to about 1856, and Goodwin Barmby. Now, these two people you probably never heard of, but they really were the founding fathers of communism, and this is way before Karl Marx, and the influence, of course, was tremendous on Marx and his partner, as it were, Friedrich Engels. But because they were actually paid by a secret society called the League of the Just.
Yep.
And basically, the League of the Just paid Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to write the Communist Manifesto. I think it was 1847, published in 1848. But this whole thing was simply the byproduct of these secret societies, which have already existed. And of course, fortunately, you do have access to the Internet, so you can check everything that you hear from Dr. Cuddy and for myself. The League of the Just paid, certainly, Karl Marx. Now, that was 1847. Remember, it was 20 years before that when Robert Owen was setting up his commune there in New Harmony, Indiana. But they're all working towards the same goal, and now, today, we're seeing the fruition of it. Isn't it wonderful why we have Medicare, 100 million Americans on Medicare and Medicaid, and now, of course, with Obamacare, we'll probably get another 20 million people on Medicaid. Isn't that wonderful? Free health care, and then, of course, we have Social Security for, 56 million people. In a couple of years, it'll be 76 million people. But the trouble is, where's the money coming from? And there's not any money there. And basically, this whole thing is going to collapse. They know it's going to collapse. They just don't want you to know it's going to collapse. Until, of course, it's too late. And then out of the chaos that develops and the war that's coming will come, of course, this new utopian society under the total control of a godless conspiracy. Go ahead.
And that, I remember, there was Robert Hugh Benson, when he was writing about the Lord of the World in 1907, looking toward the future, he called it the heaving dun of American socialism. It's not going to be a pretty picture, that's for sure. So Robert Owen had a son, Robert Dale Owen, and he had joined up with Fanny Wright, Madame Francois Darroux-Mont, and then they joined up with Orestes Brownson. Later on, Brownson converted to Christianity and sort of exposed the plot. And he said that it had been basically successfully pursued. And he said one of the originators of the plot, Robert Dale Owen, son of Robert Owen, had become a congressman from Indiana and had a great deal to do with the founding of the Smithsonian Institute there in Washington, D.C., because that was all part of the replacement. You know, if you emphasize science, then you don't need to talk about a God and creator and belief and so on. You want to be objective and see the information and the scientific experiments must occur, and you must prove your thesis, and so forth. And so this was a deliberate attempt to transfer power and influence. So, for example, if you look at the Illuminati founder Weishaupt's instructions to those of the degree EPOPS, that's EPOPTS, EPOPS, he says the illuminating legislator states, quote, "You will incessantly form new plans and try every means to seize upon the public education, the ecclesiastical government, the chairs of literature, and the pulpit," end quote. And specifically concerning public education, in the, quote, continuation of the instructions on the government of the Illuminatis, laws for the local superiors, one finds the following. Now, see if this rings a bell. Our strength, this is, this specific instructions that are given on the government of the Illuminatis, the members of the Illuminati. Our strength chiefly consists in numbers, but much will also depend on the means employed to form the pupil. Young people are pliant and easily take the impression. The prefect will therefore spare no pains to gain possession of the schools which lie within his district, and also of their teachers. He will find need of placing them under the tuition of members of our order. Remember, they called the Illuminati the order. For this is the true method of infusing our principles and of training our young men. It is thus that the most ingenious men are prepared to labor for us and are brought into discipline, and thus that the affection conceived by our young pupils for the order will gain as deep root as to all other early impressions, end quote. So they were going to use the schools very much like they're planning to use the schools today. Get the youngsters down, not 6 years old, not 5, not 4, but down, because that's where you have your values formed at a very early age. The saying about admonish or train up a child the way he should go, and he thereafter will not depart from it. And that's very true. All right, now, establishing the first commune in the U.S., as I said, the 1820s, New Harmony, Indiana, Robert Owen, in his opening address there, claimed this, quote, "I am come to this country," that's U.S., "to introduce an entire new order of society, to change it from an ignorant, selfish system to an enlightened social system, which shall gradually unite all interests into one and remove all cause for contest between individuals," end quote. Now, that's what I mean about the communist or Hegelian dialectic. What they do is they create a lot of chaos, and then they come in, through a dialectical process, and people are coerced, basically, to compromise, and so they have this chaos coming back again in Iraq. You have the chaos of the Muslims fighting the Jews, Israelis over the Middle East. Within Islam, you have the Sunnis against the Shia. For years, for centuries, you had the Catholics against the Protestants. And they want to bring out of this chaos an order. Order ab chao, C-H-A-O, which stands for chaos. Order out of chaos is their means of control. And so they deliberately cause these conflicts and pit one side against another, and in general just sort of stir things up.
And basically, of course, it's just like we're doing today. We're financing the terrorist movement all throughout the Middle East. The CIA and their black funds, which they get from the drug smuggling, suddenly financed the overthrow of the government in Libya, killed 50 to 100,000 people, but who cares? And then, of course, we overthrew the government in Tunisia, probably killed 10, 20,000. We don't know how many thousands they killed in Egypt. We know certainly the Christians there, largely, they used to have 10% Coptic Christians. Now they're down to 1 to 2%. We're doing a great job of killing Christians throughout the world. We're funding the terrorists who are killing the Christians in Syria. And where's the outcry from the American churches against the fact that our government is financing the mercenaries in Syria who are killing the Christians? When was the last time you heard of a Presbyterian or Catholic, certainly leader, talking about killing Christians and being funded by American tax dollars or CI black funds? Go ahead, Dennis.
Okay, and so I'm going to read this quote. It's a somewhat long quote, but the point in reading this is you'll see that this mimics very closely what Weishaupt said his educational plan was that we've already covered. And this is what in the Works of Orestes Brownson is revealed they were up to. Their plot, as it were. And see if it also doesn't ring a bell as to what's happening today.
And that's Orestes Brownson. That's 1827, somewhere in there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and later on, he's active there. And in 1840 or so, he reveals this. He has like a 20-volume of his work. He's converted to Christianity. And so this is what he's saying about what their plan had been. He says the great object was to get rid of Christianity and to convert our churches into halls of science. The plan was not to make open attacks on religion, although we might belabor the clergy and bring them into contempt where we could, but to establish a system of state, we said national schools, from which all religion was to be excluded, in which nothing was to be taught but such knowledge as is verifiable by the senses, and to which all parents...
Hold the thought, we'll be back. That's just what they've done with our Supreme Court. Yep. Go right ahead, Dennis.
Right, and so this is just like Weishaupt said, what Brownson was up to, and just like what is occurring today. And so they're going to use the schools, and he continues here. He says, schools from which all religion was to be excluded, in which nothing was to be taught but such knowledge as is verifiable by the senses, like science, scientific knowledge, and to which all parents were to be compelled by law to send their children. Our complete plan was to take the children from their parents at the age of 12 or 18 months. That's very similar to what Lamar Alexander said he wanted to do more recently. And then he goes on, Brownson says, and to have them nursed, fed, clothed, and trained in these schools at the public expense. But at any rate, we were to have godless schools for all the children of the country. The plan has been successfully pursued, he says, and the whole action of the country on the subject has taken the direction that we sought to give it. So here he is, when he's exposing what he and the others have been up to, saying exactly what Weishaupt had intended, Weishaupt is the Illuminati, and his plans for education. And it is exactly what's occurring today, or in fact, since about the 1960s. Now, relevant to, quote, schools from which all religion was to be excluded, end quote, you had your 1960 Bible reading school prayer was banned by the Supreme Court. And relevant to his, quote, knowledge as is verifiable by the senses being taught, this was promoted by teaching exclusively Darwinian evolution. And relevant to his statement at the age of 12 or 18 months, being nursed, fed, clothed, and trained, as I said, Lamar Alexander, who had become Secretary of Education on November 1st of 1989, he referred to, quote, schools that will serve children from age 3 months to age 18. And relevant to this, the godless schools, part of what Brownson said, relevant to that for all the children in the country, William Z. Foster was the head of the American Communist Party, and in his book, 1932, called Toward Soviet America, he referred to, quote, studies being cleansed of religious features and said God will be banished from the schools, end quote. So what I'm getting at here is the Illuminati, up through Robert Owen, up till today, is you can find the same sort of language, the same sort of goals, and the same results occurring. And so what's going on in the schools over the last 50 years or so is not by accident. It's part of this long-range plan.
And I think you're absolutely right. I appreciate so very much your being with us. A parting thought, and then I'll let you go.
Well, the parting thought is pray for Western civilization and a Christian America, because the assault is here. The assault is on.
God bless. Thanks very much. Our guest, of course, has been Dr. Dennis Cuddy, and basically he's pointing out that the plan was always to use the schools to destroy the religious faith of our country. He goes back to the writing, certainly, in 1827 of Robert Owens and Brownstein, who was actually part and parcel of the conspiracy there, became an evangelical Christian, and he actually wrote about 20 volumes explaining how this whole plan was laid out in the 1820s, and of course it came to fruition in 1962 when the Supreme Court, which was by that time under the total control of Freemasons who worship a different God, actually took God and prayer out of our schools. But then, of course, they got the Masons out of the Supreme Court. There's not one evangelical Christian in the United States Supreme Court today. Do you know that? There are a lot of people there who profess Christianity, but not one of them is evangelical Christian. I think there are 5 or 6 of them are Catholics, and of course they are answerable to their superiors, and the whole purpose is to destroy Christianity in America. And by destroying Christianity, why, you can justify this all-powerful state and using the financial and military power of the United States to bring about a one-world government that will worship a different God, because of course these people want a one world government, they want a one world financial system, and that's why they're in the process of destroying our current financial system. Incidentally, most of the major billionaires are bailing out of stock market today, and if you haven't done that, you really should, and we'll be talking about this in great detail next week. We're going to have not only James Corbett on Monday, I think we're having Gerald Salenti on Monday or Tuesday, and he'll be giving you his anticipation that we're moving into some very, very difficult financial times this coming year. Make your preparations accordingly, because they want to destroy our financial system, impoverish our people, and bring in a new world financial system. And lastly, of course, they want to destroy Christianity, which is why, of course, our military forces, in the military today, if you are a chaplain, you cannot pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Certainly, if you are in the military and you talk about your Christian faith, you can get into real problems. Certainly, the American military has imposed new constitutions on both Iraq and Afghanistan under Sharia law. The people don't want it there. They don't want their government under Sharia law. Basically, they may be Muslims, but they don't want to be governed by Sharia law. But we're imposing it upon them, as we're doing all throughout the Middle East. Why are we doing that? Why, of course, to strengthen the hand of the very, very small, maybe 5% of the people who identify with the radical Islamic movement and the Muslim Brotherhood. And we want to create an enemy. You can't have a war unless you have an enemy. And so we're doing everything we can to build up the radical Islamic movement all throughout the Middle East. And when you understand that, what's going on begins to make sense. You can understand why we are financing the radical Islamic movement that is attacking Syria today and killed 125,000 people or more. You can understand why we finance the radical Islamic movement that overthrew Suddenly Gaddafi in Libya and tortured him to death. Yes, sirree, American tax dollars to death. We tortured Gaddafi to death. And then, of course, the same thing in Tunisia, same thing in Egypt. But, ladies and gentlemen, men and women become accomplices to the evils they fail to oppose. And if you're not actively involved in helping us get the information out, then you become part of the problem. Oh, we live in a wonderful society, but the whole thing is beginning to come unglued at the present time. Basically, you need to get involved. You need to understand what's going on. This is why we hope you go to our website, radioliberty.com, and you'll watch our DVDs. You'll certainly listen to our radio programs. You can listen to them 4 hours a day live, 24 hours a day archived. You'll read our newsletters. We have a number of the videos that we put up there under a section called New Videos on the web or around the web. Certainly go to that site. We try to post things there a couple of times a week, which we think are important. If you're in a position to help financially, we'd certainly appreciate hearing from you, because it is an expensive proposition, certainly, to maintain our network of stations. We're heard, as they say, certainly 5 hours every single day. So please pray for America, pray for revival. Our telephone number, 1-800-544-8927, radioliberty.com.